It's a Wednesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. How worried should we be about the way that the Grizzlies are actually winning these games of late? Plus, we're going to take a look at the pros and cons of Cam Spencer giving Kevin Durant the business, and we're going to preview Grizzlies-Jazz, all that and more on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joe Mullinax. You have come to the right place for Memphis Grizzlies conversation, as this is Locked On Grizzlies. Each and every time an episode drops, we are so grateful to have you with us. Just me solo today. DeMichael Cole dealing with some things, getting caught up on some work. Life happens sometimes, and I'm happy to be there. He's there for me, so I'm happy to be there for him, and I'm happy to be there for you, dear listener, dear viewer, as we talk Grizzlies basketball for the next 30 minutes or so here on Locked On Grizzlies. Remember, you can like, comment, rate, review, subscribe wherever you get podcasts and make us a part of your everyday NBA Memphis Grizzlies content consumption. Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, it is all good. Also, remember, you can check out LockedOnDaily.com, our free daily newsletter. You can subscribe there, getting words from me on the Grizzlies each and every time that a newsletter drops, which is just about every day. So hopefully you're a subscriber already. If you are, thank you so much for being one. It is much appreciated. If you're not, make sure you're subscribing either LockedOnDaily.com and YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, wherever you get podcasts. I wasn't on yesterday's show. DeMichael had yesterday's solo talking about the very impressive win that the Grizzlies were able to pull off over a Phoenix Suns team that, once again, it came down to the final possession, but this time, instead of Memphis watching the game slip away, they were able to hold on for a much-needed victory over Phoenix. And the Grizzlies have won 3 games now in a row, 3 games consecutively. Much better than the alternative. I want to start the show with that, right? I don't want you to sit there and think that I'm getting spoiled or I am bored on a Wednesday and I don't have anything else to talk about. That's not the point of this in any way, shape, or form. I provide hard-hitting analysis. That's what you turn in for. Isn't that right? Over the last decade plus, has anyone called me irrational at any point? Of course not. Dear listener, dear viewer, you know better. So when I say that even though the Grizzlies have won 3 games in a row, I'm still mildly concerned. Hopefully you know it's coming from the right place. And it's coming from this idea. Something that I have noticed in my watching of the games, I'm sure you've picked up on it as well, but Fast Break Breakfast on X, Keith Parrish, also hosts the Grits and Grinds podcast. You should definitely check that out today after you check out Locked On Grizzlies. Keith does a phenomenal job with his podcasting. He's also a bit of a stats geek, which I can appreciate as a fellow stats guy. He certainly is more tapped into it than I am. He posted this yesterday. The Grizzlies have had a halftime lead in 1 of their last 12 games. 1 of their last 12 games. They have been behind by double digits in 10 of those 12 games. And he goes on to perhaps mildly sarcastically say, probably not an issue. Now, for those of you that are curious, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. The Grizzlies are 7-5 or 5-7 across those 12 games, so a losing record over those last 12. And it has not been pretty, the way that the Grizzlies have given up leads, double-digit leads in particular, to build off of the point that was being made there. Memphis has lost multiple times by double digits. They've also won multiple times by double digits, except removing that stretch of 1-possession games we were talking about. They beat Dallas by 11. They lost to the Indiana Pacers and the Los Angeles Clippers by double digits at the beginning of the streak that we're talking about. But Memphis is not playing well, especially in the first half of games. And they are having to be bailed out time and time again by the greatness of Ja Morant in the final frames of contest. Now, that's a nice problem to have, right? To have a superstar the caliber of Ja Morant that is able to score the ball in buckets at the most important and opportune moments of the contest. Again, I sound like I'm yelling at the clouds. But the goal for this Grizzlies team is to compete in the postseason, right? That is what the focus is. And when you get to the postseason, whether it's the Houston Rockets, the Denver Nuggets, the Los Angeles Lakers, maybe it's a team like the Golden State Warriors, whoever you're facing in a first-round matchup potentially, the Memphis Grizzlies cannot afford to fall behind the way that they have. Because in some of these games, they're playing against teams that are simply not very good, and they're able to rally back from being down by so many points. The Dallas Mavericks are a good example of that this past Friday. Not to rain on the already sad state of the Mavericks' affairs, but Dallas is not a good basketball team right now. They are injured. They are broken emotionally, and they put up a valiant effort against Memphis this past Friday night, and were embarrassing the Grizzlies for a large portion of that game. The Grizzlies were down at the half to the Dallas Mavericks by 3, which doesn't sound too bad. But the reality of the situation is, in a game like that, it feels like more because of the context of what the Dallas Mavericks were. Another good example, the way that Memphis was playing against the San Antonio Spurs, a miserable second quarter. I know DeMichael has talked about the second quarter woes, the rotational questions, what guys are being put into the games that lead to these massive runs in these second frames. Memphis lost that quarter by 18 points to the San Antonio Spurs. So that was a 19-point Spurs lead, and the Grizzlies rallied back admirably in the second half, but they weren't able to completely make up that ground. That is a challenge when you are down by so many points, even if it's early in the game. Because one of the arguments is, hey, at least they're down early, right? They have time to come back. Yeah, but you also have to expend an absurd amount of energy to come back from a double-digit deficit. It is counterproductive to what the Grizzlies are trying to be. So am I worried about it? Yeah. And one of the reasons I'm worried about it is I'm not entirely sure how it gets fixed. Does it get fixed with health and condensing rotations as the playoffs approach? Maybe. But do we trust Taylor Jenkins to condense those rotations? The last time Memphis was in the playoffs, I wrote about this over at Grizzlied. The last time the Grizzlies were in the playoffs, Jenkins had a 9-man rotation. So if we're operating under that assumption, who those guys are is a topic for another podcast, perhaps. But the point is, minutes will go up and maybe the rotation stuff gets a little bit cleaner. But Taylor Jenkins still plays 11, sometimes 12 guys at this stage of the season. And when you are mixing and matching and data collecting, however you want to phrase it, that can lead to disjointed rotations, and that can lead to the struggles that the Grizzlies are facing in the second quarters of games. Against good teams, they are not going to be able to rally back like that consistently. It's just not going to happen. And you're digging a hole for yourself that it's going to be darn near impossible to get out of. So Memphis has to find a way, starting tonight against the Utah Jazz team that I want to stress, we're going to preview this more later on in the show, they don't want to win. Right? They are 15-50 on the season, 7-26 on the road. They do not want to win this basketball game. They are not interested. That is not something that is within the realm of their desires. They are hoping to lose because they are trying to capture the flag, right? Cooper Flag from Duke, more than likely. It is going to be a pretty aggressive tank from the Jazz. We don't even know who's going to be active in the game for the Utah Jazz. With that in mind, you have to find ways to be aggressive and be active against this Jazz team and against every team that you see. You have to be more locked in, to use the phrasing of the players, earlier in contest. You have to be paying attention to detail. And if you're a coach, you have to understand that with Jaren Jackson Jr. out, one of, and Taylor Jenkins, to his credit, has been doing better with this lately, one of John Morant or Desmond Bane has to be on the court at all times. Obviously, you want them to play together as much as you can, but when they need breaks, it should be Des out there leading the offense and the team, or Ja out there leading the offense or the team. If you do not have a star caliber player on the court, any team is going to give you the business. And that's important to understand, and that's important to lock in on, not just the players, but the coaches as well. How worried are you about the way the Grizzlies are winning games, competing in games of late? Again, going down double digits often, not always ending the way that they wanted to. Hit me up on X at Joe Mullinax. Let me know in the comments how you're feeling about that. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, the depth that we saw on display against the Phoenix Suns was impressive. But what are some possible negatives of such a situation? We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Stick around. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by WayFair. Your home should reflect your style, and with WayFair, it is easier than ever to make that happen. Whether you're looking for a simple refresh or tackling a big home project, WayFair has everything that you need in one place. Wayfair's huge selection makes it easy to find the perfect piece no matter your space or budget. From cozy furniture and stylish decor to kitchen essentials and outdoor must-haves, Wayfair has it all, and at prices that fit your budget. The site makes it simple to compare styles and get your orders fast with free delivery. You'll be surprised to find everything from storage solutions to patio decor and so much more. It'll be your go-to place for all things home. Head over to wayfair.com and find something that's just your style today. That's WayFair.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. Today's episode is also brought to you by TurboTax. This is a message from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now, Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who will give your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy, all so you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guaranteed details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. So in the newsletter yesterday, I wrote about, over at LockedOnDaily.com, I wrote about the pros and cons of depth. And again, it sounds like I'm being a Debbie Downer for the sake of being a Debbie Downer, but I'm really trying not to. If you're an everydayer, last week, it was bleak for your boy Joe Mullinax last week. Things were not going well in my mind when it came to the Grizzlies. I'm feeling better now, 3 wins in a row. At the end of the day, a win is a win. The legendary philosopher Dominic Toretto once said, it doesn't matter if you win by an inch or a mile. Winning is winning, and I agree with you, Dom. Family forever. Family's everything. But all this celebration of Cam Spencer and Lamar Stevens that I saw online, yeah, it's good, right? You like the quotes that Cam Spencer is saying about, I live and die for this. He's an aggressive guy. He's a competitor. You see him out there jawing with Kevin Durant after making a 3. Desmond Bane backing him up. You want someone that has that energy. You don't get a ton of that from the other Memphis Grizzlies players. So I get that. And Lamar Stevens on the second 10-day contract, having his best game of the year. Very convenient timing. Go on, get signed for the year then, Lamar Stevens. Good for you. But what I want to make sure that we keep our eyes on the prize of is how these guys got the playing time in the first place. Who was out? Riddle me this, dear listener to viewer. Who was out for the Memphis Grizzlies on Monday night against the Phoenix Suns? Luke Kennard. Who else? Santi Aldama. Who else? Zach Edey. Who else? Jaren Jackson Jr. Who else? Vince Williams Jr. You picking up what I'm putting down? These guys were playing because they had to. These guys were playing because the actual rotation pieces for the Memphis Grizzlies, the ones that you hope will be involved in the postseason push sooner rather than later, they were unable to play. And because of that, you had to rely on a guy like Cam Spencer, who has played far more down in South Haven with the hustle than he has with the Memphis Grizzlies. Going into tomorrow night's contest, the Grizzlies injury report does not look as scary, right? Vince Williams Jr., not on the injury report. He's going to play. Luke Kennard, not on the injury report. He's going to play. Those are 2 perimeter players that you would imagine are going to take time away from Lamar Stevens and Cam Spencer. And somewhere on the interwebs, someone is going to say that's a mistake. Cam Spencer should be playing instead of Luke Kennard, or Lamar Stevens should be playing instead of Vince Williams Jr. And that is a very short-sighted point of view. That is something that does not prioritize the here and the now. Or, excuse me, it prioritizes the here and the now, but it doesn't have the macro view of things. Cam Spencer's a wonderful story, and I do believe that my boy Luke Kennard's time in Memphis is fading fast because Luke Kennard is going to be due another pay raise, or at the very least a longer-term contract, like a 2-year, $18 million kind of thing, 2-year, $16 million kind of thing, maybe even a little bit more than that. He's having a good season. He's showing, Luke Kennard is, that he can be that facilitator of offense in a secondary manner that he was for the Detroit Pistons. The guy that I have been clamoring for all this time has shown up in Memphis just to move on in a few months, more than likely. But that's because Cam Spencer exists, and he does a lot of similar things for what will certainly be a lesser amount of money. I'm cool with that reality, but that doesn't belittle what Luke Kennard does now and how Luke Kennard is better than Cam Spencer in the here and now. Is Cam Spencer a better anticipator of passing lanes? He had 3 steals against the Suns. I think so. Not disputing that. But I also think Luke Kennard is a better offensive weapon at this point, and he's a veteran player that needs to get that opportunity first. Vince Williams Jr., returning from injury, doesn't look like himself. DeMichael and I have talked about that before. He's not the 3-and-D wing that he was last year when he was one of the best players on a really bad basketball team. But the ceiling of Vince Williams Jr. is so much higher than what Lamar Stevens is capable of. If Lamar Stevens was able to be Vince Williams Jr., you know what Lamar Stevens would have? A full-time NBA contract. And maybe the Grizzlies give that to him at the end of this next 10-day contract that he's in the middle of. They either will or they'll move on from him. I don't think they'll sign Cam Spencer just yet. I anticipate that happening in the offseason. But Lamar Stevens and Cam Spencer, while they are good stories, are not the guys that are going to get you to a first-round win in the playoffs. Luke Kennard has shown the ability to be an offensive weapon, a spacer, a game changer in terms of giving room for Desmond Bane and John Morant and any other player on the team that's able to get downhill off of dribble penetration to work. That is a strength of Luke Kennard. Vince Williams Jr., when he is right, and we still have about a month or so to see him get right physically, has the capacity to be a game wrecker defensively. Imagine him at 100% alongside Jalen Wells. The issues that they would create for opposing teams. And he could shoot the 3. But he has told DeMichael that he is around 80% right now. Vince Williams Jr. at 80% may not be better than Gigi Jackson at 100%. He may not be better than Lamar Stevens at 100%. But you have to get Vince Williams Jr. to 100%, and the best way to do that is through live game reps. So I love stories like Cam Spencer and Lamar Stevens. I'm old enough to remember when the Hateful Eight Memphis Grizzlies went out there, and it was one of the most ridiculous lineups in the history of basketball. Matt Barnes might have been the best player for the team that night, and they found a way to win back in the grit and grind era. So don't get me wrong. I am a fan of underdog stories, and I am a fan of guys finding ways to contribute. And I'm a fan of this front office finding players like Cam Spencer that are able to replace players like Luke Kennard when money is due, because that is what's going to allow for this team to keep together the Desmond Banes and the Jaren Jackson Jr.'s and the John Morants of the world, 3 max or near max contracts. That is going to pay dividends for this organization as long as they're willing to still pay the luxury tax. It'll keep them out of the second apron, potentially. That holds tremendous value. Don't put the cart before the horse. This is regular season basketball. This is March basketball. The cream is starting to rise to the top. It's either teams making a playoff push or teams phoning it in for the rest of the way. Don't be deceived by teams that are phoning it in. We're going to talk more about the Utah Jazz in a moment. Are the Utah Jazz phoning it in? You tell me. The way that the Jazz are operating. I think it's safe to say that to an extent, they're phoning it in a little bit, at least as a front office and organization. Maybe the players and the coaches aren't doing that so much. But I think it's safe to assume that there is some phonage happening, right? So we have to be cognizant of that. And we have to be in a position where when they play those good teams, how are those guys going to play if they play at all? And if they don't play, that doesn't mean that they should or they should replace somebody else. The postseason is the goal. The depth helps win games that maybe you should lose if you didn't have those quality of players at the end of your reserves. That doesn't mean they should replace the guys that are on the injured list for that given game. Hit me up on X. Let me know in the comments. Again, I love Cam Spencer. I think he's phenomenal. I think he's a long-term piece. Luke Kennard is still a better fit for what this team is trying to do. And that is going to matter when the postseason starts. And if Luke gets cold, maybe you break Cam Spencer in case of emergency if he's on the roster. Remember, two-way guys not eligible for the postseason. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, I've been talking about the Jazz, a very interesting game heading into the Mullinax weekend, the back-to-back, going to be there in Memphis for the Cavaliers and the Heat games. Very excited about that. But before that, Grizzlies-Jazz, we'll talk about it next. Stick around. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Skims. When I found out Skims was making underwear for men, I was intrigued. I've heard so much about their quality from friends and family. I had to give it a try, and let me tell you, it lives up to the hype. I've had issues with underwear my entire life. Fit, comfort, finding the right style for me, it's all been rough, but Skims changes all that. Their men's line offers something for everyone, from boxer briefs to classic briefs, all designed with the perfect balance of comfort and style. I tried their boxer brief, and let me tell you, I'm hooked. They are perfect for my active lifestyle. They move with me, never lose their shape, and stay in place all day. Whether I'm working out or running errands, they're the most comfortable and reliable underwear I have ever owned. Plus, the lightweight material feels amazing. It's almost like you're wearing nothing at all. Shop Skims Men at skims.com/LockedOnNBA and Skims stores. Let them know that we sent you, and after you place your order, select podcast in the survey and select our show from the drop-down menu that follows. Go check them out. All right, so injury report, status report for Grizzlies-Jazz. Let's start with the Utah Jazz. Elijah Harkless on a two-way transfer is out. Taylor Hendricks remains out with his fibula fracture. Micah Porter is out on the two-way, and Oscar Joebi, I'm sure I mispronounced that, I'm sorry, also out on a two-way transfer. Keontae George, an important piece for the Jazz, is doubtful for the game with a left foot contusion. Then you have Jordan Clarkson, Jaden Springer, and Lauri Markkanen, the Jazz's best player, all questionable with low back injury management, left plantar fasciitis, or back soreness. So questionable means 50-50 shot to get in against the Grizzlies on Wednesday. That injury management one in particular worth keeping an eye on. For the Grizzlies, Brandon Clark and Zach Edey are questionable with knee and ankle soreness, respectively. Santi Aldama remains out with a calf strain. Jaren Jackson Jr. remains out with his ankle sprain. And then Yuki Karamura and Zion Pullen are also out. This is a game the Grizzlies should win, right? And this is a game that the Grizzlies should win decisively. The Utah Jazz, as I mentioned earlier in the show, 15-50, not entirely interested in trying to win at this stage. The players are, and this is one of those things that you always want to clarify. The Utah Jazz, if you let them stick around, they are going to compete their tails off, and they're going to do their absolute darndest to be the best team that they can be. They are going to fight and scratch and claw because they are competitors. They only lost by 6 to the Boston Celtics. John Collins had a massive game in that contest. And those names that I just read off that were questionable, Brandon Clark, Zach Edey, alongside Jaren Jackson Jr. and Santi Aldama being out, John Collins could have another field day against a wounded Grizzlies front court. But it was 28 points on 30 shots, not the most efficient evening for Collins. And you also have Colin Sexton, who scored 16 points on 16 shots. A guard that can go off and score at any time, had 13 assists in the game against the Celtics. That's impressive. And this is a guy and a group of guys that are doing this against a Celtics defense that, while they didn't have Jason Tatum out on the floor, still had Drew Holiday, Derek White, Jaylen Brown. There were defensive weapons out there for Boston. So judge this Utah team and think that they are not going to compete at your own risk. Bryce Sensabaugh is a revelation right now for Utah off the bench. He scored 22 points on 11 shots against Boston, 5 for 7 from beyond the arc, 5 assists, 4 rebounds. This is a guy that is capable of beating you. Kyle Filipowski coming off the bench for the Jazz, another player that could take advantage of a weakened Grizzlies front court. So John Morant and Desmond Bane, assuming Lauri Markkanen doesn't play, but even if he does, John Morant will be the best player on the court, and he has to play that way. This needs to be a big night once again for Ja, where he goes out there and establishes himself dominantly. Now, that mid-range jumper is going to be important because you have a guy like Walker Kessler for the Jazz, an impressive defensive force in his own right. Couple of blocks against Boston, a double-double, 11 points, 10 rebounds. He's going to be patrolling the paint, and he's going to make things difficult for Morant, no doubt. But if Ja is able to get out and get moving, listen to some of the numbers for the Celtics in terms of offense. Drew Holiday, 4 of 9. Derek White, 6 of 16. Not the best outing. But the name that I really want to come to is Sam Hauser. All right, Sam Hauser was 9 of 19 from 3 against the Utah Jazz. And that was a major reason why the Celtics were able to win with numerous key starters out. That matters significantly because the Grizzlies are going to be able to trot out a Jalen Wells that can hit the 3, a Desmond Bane that most certainly can hit the 3. G.G. Jackson might be in line to get another start. And if he does, we know that he can hit the 3. And then Jay Huff, if he's a guy that gets in the mix for that starting position, maybe Marvin Bagley gets his first start as a member of the Memphis Grizzlies with these front court injuries. If that does indeed occur, Bagley's not necessarily a 3 guy, but he's shown that he can play that dunker spot pretty aggressively. The Grizzlies starters this past game against the Suns were obviously Morant and Bane. And then after that, you had G.G. Jackson, Jalen Wells, and Jay Huff. Jay Huff was 5 of 11 from the field, 4 for 8 from beyond the arc. I'd imagine Huff will get that start again. He played well enough to earn it. Ja Morant being aggressive, getting to the rim. A bounce-back game for Desmond Bane. I think there is real possibility there for Dez for a get-right contest. He usually doesn't have, except for that, that lull that he had at the start of the season, usually not a guy that is going to play poorly for extended periods of time, right? That one stretch at the start of the year that I try to forget about because, folks said he was washed or couldn't play. Opening night against the Jazz, Dez had 24 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists, had a good outing. Ja Morant, 22 points, 10 assists, another good outing. And that was back when Utah had Lauri Markkanen and Taylor Hendricks, Keontae George. At least 2 of those guys will likely not be on the court. George is doubtful. Hendricks is out. Markkanen may not be out there either. So this is a Grizzlies team that has the potential to really shine and take advantage of this Utah team. Another win is up for grabs, and that's important going into a weekend where the Grizzlies are going to be taking on pretty solid competition in the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Miami Heat. That is not what you're getting from the likes of the Utah Jazz. Again, Utah already eliminated from playoff contention in the Western Conference. They are the first team out west to have that happen to them. What does that mean? That means you can make an argument that Utah is the worst team in the Western Conference, considering how well the San Antonio Spurs have played, even without Victor Wembanyama. The New Orleans Pelicans playing really nicely against the Clippers last night. Safe to say it's Utah with a bullet in terms of being the worst team in the Western Conference. Memphis has to take advantage of that, and they have to win, and they have to make an example of the Jazz, not in terms of embarrassing them, but in terms of taking care of business professionally, moving on to a back-to-back this weekend to home and home. So the Grizzlies will be staying in Memphis for the back-to-back, sleeping in their own beds. A little bit easier, no travel, but still, you want to limit the minutes where you can, and this is a real opportunity for them to do just that. Thank you so much for being with us on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. It is much appreciated. I know DeMichael appreciates it, as do I. I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing some of you guys out and about in Memphis. I'll be at both games Friday and Saturday night. Grizzlies take on the Cavaliers on Friday, Heat on Saturday. I think I've mentioned in the past we're going to have a couple of bonus episodes of Locked On Grizzlies, a Saturday and a Sunday episode of the show for you to check out to celebrate me being there in Memphis with DeMichael. DeMichael will join me, if not for the entire show on Saturday and Sunday. He will be there for at least the first segment or the end segment. He'll be there for part of the show. I'll be reporting live there from Memphis, Tennessee, already set up. I'll be in the media room. It's going to be amazing. Huge shout out to the Grizzlies PR folks for helping a guy feel welcome back. It's been a while since I've been covering the team in person. Looking forward to this weekend and hopefully getting to see you. We're finalizing our plans for that meetup on Friday night. I know people have been asking about it. We'll announce it on X as soon as we have that location decided, and hopefully you'll be able to hang out with DeMichael and I Friday night after the game. But before that, obviously we'll talk Grizzlies-Jazz. We'll look ahead to the weekend that is coming up and so much more. Make sure you're with us here on Locked On Grizzlies. Make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing wherever you get podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube. Make sure you're checking out the Locked On Daily newsletter. It's free, lockedondaily.com. Again, lockedondaily.com, and subscribe to the Locked On Grizzlies newsletter. Words from me on the Grizzlies each and every single day. Thank you again so much for being with me on this Wednesday edition of the show. I am Joe Mullinax. Stay locked in. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy Grizzlies-Jazz, and hopefully we head into the weekend with the Grizzlies continuing their winning streak. See ya.